Okay, so welcome to the video on the next thought leadership session with the Improvement Service. We're joined today by Abigail Marks and Michelle Weldon-Johns, and we're here to have a quick discussion just round about home working and flexible working during the pandemic. This follows up on a series of outputs that we've done recently around this subject area, but I'd like Abigail and Michelle just to maybe introduce themselves for a minute or so, just to kind of cover what we've done before. So I'll maybe start with Abigail, thanks.
Hi, my name's Abigail Marks. I'm Professor of the Future of Work at Newcastle University. I'm also Principal Investigator on the Working at Home project, which is a ESRC funded project looking at home working under COVID and also home working going forwards. I have previously talked about how local government employees are experiencing home working, the challenges of home working, particularly those faced by women and those in more constrained housing situations. I've looked at how people's productivity has been impacted and how the pace of work has changed during the pandemic.
Okay, thanks. Michelle?
I'm Dr. Michelle Weldon-Johns, Senior Lecturer at Abertay University and an Employment Law Lecturer there. And my work previously was more about work-family rights more generally, but in the context of the pandemic has looked a bit more at different forms of flexible working and work-family rights in the context of the pandemic, also looking at the gendered impact of the pandemic on women and their working lives as well. And I prepared a thought piece on home working for local government previously, which looked at both the benefits and the drawbacks as well of home working, particularly when we think about it in a sort of normal sense compared to a pandemic home working experiences.
Okay, that's great. Thanks both. So we've got a few kind of questions that we're just going to talk around over this series of videos. So the first one we're looking at, I suppose, is when we're thinking about home working is what kind of practical support do you think we should be providing from employees? And I suppose there's two aspects to that. One is around the practical support that we have and others around kind of well-being support as well. So Michelle, maybe just start with you and your thoughts around that.
Well, of course, employees need to have the ability to work from home effectively. So they need the kind of IT support or infrastructure at home that they would have access to in the work. So things like laptops or good quality broadband and all of these kind of tools that they would need to do their job effectively. So thinking about making sure they have those adequate workspaces as well. And ensuring that people have the means to actually do their job from home effectively. But also, on the other hand, as employers, we need to think about the duty of care that we owe employees, and particularly the impact that the pandemic is having on those who are home working and their mental health. And also not forgetting that health and safety obligations continue, not just when you're in a physical working environment, but even at home, all of those health and safety obligations still exist as well. So thinking about things like use of screens, the physical setup of the working environment, but also mental health and the impact of working from home with different commitments to on employees as well. And reasonable adjustments. So if people have reasonable adjustments normally at work, do they need to be given a special priority when they're working from home, or do people now have different reasonable adjustments from those that they had in the workplace too? So all of these kinds of considerations.
I think there's the basic good working space, so supportive office chair. We found between about 60 and 70% of our participants have got musculoskeletal problems because of inadequate work environments. Obviously, the IT support. I think we've got to the point where people may need some financial support in terms of buying equipment, broadband, heating bills. I think that this is now becoming a significant issue for people. I think organisations have done their best in terms of saying we understand people are in compromised positions at the moment, that people are homeschooling, that there's multiple people now working from the household, and that will be taken into account. But I think a lot of it has been rhetoric rather than offering any practical accommodation for that. And I suppose, a roadmap of how that is going to be accommodated. There's also, I think organisations need to take a little bit more responsibility for teaching employees or supporting employees in terms of managing home working. So not booking 4 Zoom meetings one after another, because it's not really helpful for people's mental health. And it's much more tempting to do that in a home working scenario than it would be in an office scenario, where you'd need space between meetings to walk between buildings, to walk between places. I think it's much more tempting to do that. So I think employers need to be supportive in terms of explaining or supporting people in terms of managing the pace of their work.
That's great, thanks. And I suppose just as a follow-up to both of you in this question, I suppose we're maybe making a difference between what was organisations' immediate response to the pandemic to enable us just to go over the line in terms of home working, but now if there's a view that this might become the norm for a certain percentage of our time as we move into the future, there has to be given that thought in terms of the long-term sustainability of all of this. So I guess some of that is, I don't know, what's your thoughts on that, and just in terms of, I suppose, how that might pan out?
Well, the other thing that has struck me more recently is, to what extent are employers really mindful of the working time regulations and the requirements for employees to have rest breaks during the day and breaks between days and weekly breaks as well? And to what extent are they thinking about that, like as Abigail has just mentioned, when scheduling meetings, when allowing people to work flexibly, but not really getting them to think about how best to manage their time, so they're having a sufficient rest breaks as well. So getting employers to think about these things and to encourage employees to think about how they manage their time most effectively, so that they are getting adequate rest periods during the day and day to day and through the week as well. So I think that's something that's struck me more recently as being something and a longer term concern to think about.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, Abigail, you can add, yeah?
I think there's a lot of issues if we're talking about long-term home working, as opposed to the short scenario that we're in at the moment. So how realistic is it to balance different people being in the office on particular days and people working from home? How do we ensure that we are doing the best for the employees as well as supporting organisational needs? There are issues in terms of advancement. Those people that are going to be in the office more frequently, are they going to get priority in terms of promotion? How do we ensure particularly younger people who are new starts in the organisation are getting adequate socialisation into the organisation when based at home? We all know that being at home, we miss out on the big picture, we miss out on these informal conversations, and it's going to be really critical for employees' success and also for their well-being to find mechanisms to help integration and also to allow people who want to go back into the office to go back into the office. And there's now the new debate on sort of community hubs, community workspaces, which clearly is very much part of the Welsh Government's agenda. That will again change the entire dynamic about location of work.